Welcome to Chapter 2 lectures. This week, we're developing insights on how we use information systems to help organizations plan for the future. The terms organizational or business strategy refer to those plans made by organizations to do well in the future. So strategy has to do with planning for the future. Among other things, strategic planning must address how a business will thrive in their industry's competitive environment. In this chapter, we'll look into some of the best known practices that help line companies' strategic planning with their information systems build out. Pay attention to the Disney animation opening case of the chapter. This case and the closing case, number 1, at the end of the chapter are intended to bring focus to the 2 strategic learning objectives identified in this week's course module, planning. Global economies and ubiquitous information on the internet have drastically increased the competitive landscape for most businesses. Market pressures drive prices down faster than the cost of goods and services. Old ways of conducting business give way to new efficiencies and found technologies. When FedEx was first announcing its overnight services, people thought it was far too expensive and almost no one needed that kind of service. But within a few years, rapid delivery was the expected part of everyday business. When one company employs a technological advantage, other companies must follow suit or be left behind. This technology treadmill creates a tremendous impetus to keep up with competitors of face annihilation. In addition to business pressures, companies face a lot of governmental and industry regulations that significantly impact their IS design. As more and more information is available on the public internet, the issues around privacy of that information have grown much faster. Building in the security aspect is required to do business that can easily exceed the original cost of the system. In addition, companies face the dilemma of the growing digital divide. Older people adopt technologies much slower than their younger counterparts. Understanding the needs of the different market segments weigh heavily on the IT departments as they work to satisfy all customers. A relatively new term called the Internet of Everything, or IoT, identifies the massive increase in the use of sensors and smart devices that pump ever increasing amounts of data into play. By some accounts, the size of the data created is growing by 40% per year. That suggests that the stored data will double every 2 years. In other words, about 90% of all the data in the world have been created in just the last 2 to 3 years. This massive amount of data can only be handled by ever more complex information systems. In many cases, the complexity of information is outrunning the ability of our workers. For organizations to survive this rapid growth in computing systems, they must become very strategic in their planning. A major misstep in the scope and direction can put a company out of business. They must project future growth and security needs while keeping an eye on what their competition is doing. Companies are becoming more and more dependent on smart computing devices to monitor the environment and to provide viable alternatives to rapid changes. Customers are becoming much more informed and are demanding that suppliers respond quickly to their needs. Keeping track of customer details has long been the domain of computer-based software. Today, companies must integrate all aspects of their operations to see the impacts of all elements within that company. Much of the consumer buying is switching to online transactions. Brick and mortar stores must adapt to this new buying reality to survive. E-commerce is not just about online buying or a version of selling from shelves in the store, but is introducing completely new ways for companies to sell goods and services. This slide is meant to show the growing complexity of the elements that impact information systems design. As IS has become the dominant force within an organization, more and more employees are hired to support the changes of business that are introduced by these computing services. Companies are finding it harder and harder to ignore this intersection of technology, economic realities, and social, political, and legal pressures. Our focus in this course is primarily within the inner circle of this graph, organizational performance responses. But I hope you can appreciate that it's not always easy or even desirable to ignore the external environmental context. Check out the two business cases, innovation technologies for airlines and airports, page 40, and the fit problem when shopping for clothes online, page 42. These examples will help you get a sense of some of the things businesses are doing to provide enhanced customer service using networked technologies. Next slide. For this week's, we're going to consider the impact of Porter's modeling of the competitive landscape. One of the key constructs come away from with this chapter, and how it's related to how we construct and use IS. Use the questions on this slide to think about how you can apply Porter's principles to the airline business. As with the last slide, the question on this slide is intended to give you thinking about potential and the limitations of selling to purely online customers. Consider the question in light of the reading on Porter's principles. While Porter's 5 forces and his work on value chains has become mainstream thinking in business, it is most useful to think about those ideas with a specific example in mind. And if you haven't finished reading chapter 2 yet, this is where you should pause and read it and then come back. Now, let's shift gears a little bit and focus on the implications of Porter's work in identifying the primary elements of competition. His work around the value chain model and then how companies can align their strategic plans to take advantages of those important considerations of the value chain. Modern companies must understand and adapt their competition if they are to survive in the marketplace. Some industries are more aggressive than others, and the failure to accurately perceive competition threats will most likely result in a failed business over time. It's important to note that the proper reaction to competition is not just to mimic what they do. Understanding the competition and their customers is critical so they know how to innovate and not just imitate. Creating value for customers requires that company understand what customers value. All non-valued activities that add cost to a good or service should be considered for elimination. Doesn't mean eliminated, but considered for elimination. Porter's famous value chain model is a useful tool to help visualize how to accomplish this. The purpose of taking this business topic side trip in this course is to provide support for the design of our information systems so they can better respond to the customers and competition. Bulk of it now is Porter's 5 forces model. Hopefully you've already read the section. As I said before, if you haven't read it yet, you should have already paused the video and read the 5 forces part. His work has been around for a long time. Back when I was first going to school, it was brand new, and I have a first edition of his competitive strategy book on my shelf. It's a testament to the fundamental nature of his ideas that they're still in practice today. Given that this class is about information systems in business, it's necessary to understand some of the driving forces in business so we can align our information system design to comprehend those realities. The business culture in Western countries is based on healthy competition. Nobody likes a monopoly unless you're the monopoly because there's little incentive to keep their costs down or their prices down. The idea of healthy competition is to encourage a particular industry to find a good balance between the cost of doing business and the profits that arise from it. Even non-profit companies must make money to pay their expenses. The five forces model puts your company in the middle of the graphic so that you can honestly examine the power exerted from your suppliers, your customers, the threat of substitute products, and the threat of other companies grabbing some of all or all of your market share. Getting a realistic understanding of a relationship to these five forces provides you with important information so you can address strategic planning. This examination of the five forces allows you to consider where you are now in relation to those forces so you can consider how to get where you want to be in the future. Once a company has selected a strategy that will allow them to flourish in the future, they can fine-tune that strategy by considering Porter's value chain model. The idea is that there are lots of activities involved in bringing goods and services to the market. For example, let's say you're manufacturing widgets. Widgets, for those of you who haven't encountered the term, is a mythological term, widget, for a product that we just use to talk about without having to be too specific about what it is. A widget is just some mythical product for the purposes of discussion. So, if you're selling widgets to retail stores, your organization has to gather all the resources it needs to manufacture the widgets. Once you manufacture them, then you have to move those products to the market. The whole process may involve tens, hundreds of other companies and human resources. The idea is that everything that touches your product adds cost to it. As the cost goes up, so does the price. Keep in mind that the value is established by the customer, something most people miss, not the maker. Customers decide if something is valuable or not. The important question is which of the activities add value to the product the customer is willing to pay for it. Anything that increases the cost of a good or service that does not bring value to the customer must be scrutinized closely. The text points out that the cost of creating activities falls into two buckets, primary and support. Primary activities directly add value to the customers, but the support activities do not necessarily. However, you may need to consider to include some of these non-value added activities to remain competitive in the marketplace. Regulatory issues sometimes fall into this category, things the government says you have to do whether or not the customer cares. Customer support is a good example of an extra cost that is not created immediate value for the customer. Think about what value people put on Nordstrom's, even though they may be more expensive than Walmart, but they value return policies and those types of things. They may only assign value to the support when they need it. However, this is an extra cost that you have to consider with your competitors. This slide shows some of the standard primary activities that are common in manufacturing. Service industries have slightly different activities, but I hope you get the idea that these primary activities are the essential elements needed to bring your product to market. Some of these terms and concepts may be new to you. Don't forget to search on the internet, Wikipedia, or whatever, if you're not sure. If you've not been in a business class, you may have to read this material a couple of times to get a sense of the importance The graphic on this slide gives you some examples related to each term. Now, excuse me, spend enough time with the material in this book to understand differences between primary and support activities. But be prepared that it's not always black and white, there's some gray. As this is not a business theory class, it's important not that you memorize all the details, but the idea is for you to understand the issues that businesses face so that we can talk about designing an IS system for them when you see the problems that they need to be solved. This chapter is laying a foundation of ideas so you can see how a firm arrives at rational strategies for remaining competitive within their industry. Once a company understands their competitive landscape and has eliminated much of the waste that comes from non-value added activities, they are ready to select a strategy for future operations. Over the years, there's a consensus the company may fall into one of the 5 categories showing on the slide. Now, these are very general and broad, but likely you can recognize where your favorite companies you know from news, work, or school fall within this spread of categories. Most companies have elements of more than one category. For example, Walmart has clearly taken a cost leadership strategy to allow them to offer products much lower priced than most of their competition. They also demonstrate organizational effectiveness by how they handle their employees and their suppliers. While you may not like how they execute the strategy, you may also like the low prices that result from them. The book does a pretty good adequate job of defining these terms, so I'm not going to go into them in detail here. The business IT alignment topic is really the focus of this chapter. Once businesses understand how they are and how they must behave in the marketplace, the IT side of the company can design, implement, and maintain information systems that complement that strategy. There are lots of ways to implement IS, but only that architecture that supports the business strategy will be considered a successful implementation. For example, if a company decides they want to be a market leader through innovation, their IT crew will implement technologies that will allow them to be successful with that strategy. Perhaps a key element of the company's strategy is to be highly customer focused. The priority of information technology and the systems they implement will be to implement those technologies that add great value to the customers. It's critical these days for IT managers and business managers to communicate effectively and efficiently. Neither can do their job efficiently without the other. By assuring there is clear communication within the management teams across disciplines, companies can attain higher levels of success in executing their business strategies. For IS technologies to have a positive impact on their companies, there must be a clear alignment with the goals of both the IT staff and the business staff. Based on real market data, companies need to select a business model that best fits their core competencies. They need to have a realistic understanding of their suppliers, their buyers, and their standing in the industry. Companies and their IT staff must develop an honest relationship of their competitors and how they need to respond to competitive moves. At the same time, as they're doing these other important tasks, they must create value for their customers. Developing a well-run organization that doesn't delight their customers not be considered a success by any normal measure.